So, welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today Troy McLachlan is back. A long time we haven't seen him here on this channel, and today we will talk about the snake gods of Atlantis. So, Troy, welcome back after a long, long time. And
Thank you. It's great to be back.
before we start our subject, I would like to have your take on all these drone sightings. I mean, at the moment, nobody really knows what is going on. There are a lot of speculations. My take is there are people who know, but for some reason they do not tell. So, what is your take?
Well, I've only seen what everybody else has seen in terms of what mainstream media have talked about. I've seen that some people come up with theories that something radioactive has been lost or stolen, and they're trying to use the drones to sniff it out. The authorities in the United States have been very reticent in explaining if they have anything to do with it, basically denying they have something to do with it. This might be trying not to create a panic if there is some kind of nuclear related issue going on. But this is against a background of which personally I am convinced that they are desperately trying to start a third world war of some kind to cover up a coming economic banking catastrophe, something that they have successfully done for millennia, particularly since the time of the Renaissance. This periodic need to readjust society through crisis so that they can reestablish their system, once again. But whether or not this is related to that, I wouldn't know for sure. I think it's suspicious. And, if it wasn't, if it was completely innocent and, if this, what is it, this, if the explanation is completely innocent and that you would have thought they would have come out and told us what it was. So something is definitely going on. And I would not like to be in New York or New Jersey at this time.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, Donald Trump made a public announcement. He said the government knows what is going
Mm.
on and they should tell us.
Hmm.
And if they really don't know, then shoot those things down and
Yeah,
then, yeah, have a look at what it's made
what they're all
like
about.
and who made it. Yeah, I don't know either, but I find it really strange that the Pentagon says it is not ours. It is not from some adversary, not a foreign entity.
Yeah.
And then the White House comes out and says, yeah, it's true, we don't really know, and but you are not in danger.
This is
How,
this is very reminiscent of the remember the spy balloons
yeah.
from a couple of years ago, I think it was. Very similar playbook. And I wouldn't trust anything that's coming out of the Biden administration, but from as much objectivity as I can muster from this as such, for those who, with the polarization of the political spectrums in America being what they are, uh, there are those who would be thinking this is some sort of plan to thwart Donald Trump's inauguration. And on the other side, I would hazard to believe that they would think that this hopefully will thwart Donald Trump's um, inauguration if there is some kind of emergency or blast or whatever that comes out of this. I don't know. People are crazy if they think that the wheels of government stop because wars or terrorist acts happen. The people talked about like has happened in Ukraine. They've done away with elections. Well, during the Second World War, um, uh, you know, Britain and the United States held elections, and that was the biggest conflict we've ever faced, and so on. You didn't in Germany because obviously you're under dictatorship of Adolf Hitler, but and the same goes with Russia and so on. But the functions of democracy in a democratic country still functioned during that time. So a local crisis or event and so on is hardly going to do the job of thwarting, I believe, the transition to Donald Trump, either if you hope it will or believe that they're going to attempt to do that. I don't think the people who would like to see Donald Trump, the high ups who would like to see Donald Trump thwarted from becoming president, are stupid enough to believe that a dirty bomb incident in New York is going to stop that. So uh, I don't know what this might be, but certainly events dictate policies and drive politics. And at this moment, they've got till January 20th to try and either lock Donald Trump into a certain policy reaction or not. Reminds me of Fletcher Prouty's The A Team. Um, they had where he claimed he was an American general who worked at the highest levels of government during the 60s and 70s, really right back to the 50s. And he claimed that the presidency by the 1970s had been well captured by the intelligence agencies because what they did was they made sure that a president had to react to their briefings. Once you have the power to brief the president and you say this must be looked into, you can totally undermine what he wants to do, what the president wants to do as part of promised policy, because he's now going to react to this. Oh, I've got to react to that, got to react to that. You keep him in reactionary mode as opposed to proactive mode, and you can very successfully scupper a presidency that you might not, agree with in terms of policy.
Mm. Yeah, there are many avenues that they could go down with this.
Mm.
It could be yeah, let's test the waters. Are the people curious but not panicking?
Yeah,
Um, they could, yeah, hype it up and even, promote a supranational defense mechanism that needs new funding, and
yeah,
everybody accepts the new taxes because we have to defend ourselves from whatever.
yeah.
And yeah, there are many, many possibilities. At this point, I have to say,
Mm.
let's just wait.
Well, once again, an event in New York City would also help hide a lot of the financial skullduggery that's been going on in terms of the banking system. We know that Building 7 housed a lot of documentation and so on during the 9/11 attacks. This was the building that wasn't hit but still collapsed into its own footprint. And there was a lot of documentation into looking into financial malfeasance going on in the banking system. They were scuppered as a result. Same thing with the Pentagon being hit. It just happened to be hit in that part of the Pentagon that dealt with accounts. The day after Rumsfeld came out and basically said there was X amount of what, $1 trillion was it? I
Brilliant.
think, yeah, gone missing and so on. The next day, the accounting department gets blown out, and nobody ever talks about that again or something. We are in far more dangerous waters now in terms of the financial system of the world. And it has always been the modus operandi of those who control the financial systems to create a crisis, a destructive crisis that allows them to position themselves as a solution at a future date to that crisis. And I would not be surprised if they're gearing up for something like this. I am of the opinion, though, as you know, Judith, uh, that they've reached the end of their rope as far as being able to achieve this. And it's um, uh, it's I believe a sea change going on in the world that's of a positive nature. But like all births, these things tend to be chaotic, painful, and possibly even violent. So we'll see where it goes. Uh, and all due respect to your American members of your audience and so on like that, New York is a interesting place to sort of try to. Los Angeles would probably be the next part, but during the Blitz, during the bombing of Hamburg and Berlin, during the siege of Leningrad, during the nuking of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, these countries' citizens did not go apeshit and start running around and evacuating cities and closing down their economies and all this sort of stuff. The Americans, on the other hand, tend to overreact to these kinds of situations. Um, and uh, um, and so if they are being targeted for this, I just hope that they've learned the lesson of 9/11 and subsequent events that, as a British, the famous British um, maxim during the Blitz in the Second World War was, keep calm and carry on. I hope that is the case, where it comes to this, but we
Mm.
shall see.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we even had some here in Germany,
Hmm.
in the UK as well.
Hmm.
But here in Germany, of course, it was over a military base in Ramstein.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's right. Hmm.
Yeah, we will see where they are going with it.
Mm.
At one point, it will reveal itself.
Mm.
And that is why I'm not making any statements that I know better than
Yeah,
anybody else, because we, the regular people, at this particular juncture, we don't know anything.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. Yeah. One can study all kinds of esoteric traditions and so on, just try and get insights into what might be happening, simply because the elites or the powers that be are themselves heavily involved in a lot of occult, esoteric sort of ideas, which can give you an insight to their thinking, not necessarily to their plans. And I think this is what we try to do in shows like this. We try to get a handle on what might be the thinking,
Yeah.
what might be the motivating factors, behind a lot of the events that are going on in the world.
Yeah, which leads me to our actual subject, the snake gods. What sparked your interest in that particular subject?
Yeah, well, it's much like the way I made a case in my book Set and Death Cult, for the modern day debt-based financial system, and basically how it effectively creates a world of bondage for entire nations and peoples, through its debt-based system. And I make the case in that book that it's derived from this distorted, um, corrupted application of the Saturn myth, the universal creator god archetype, that I refer to as Saturn, and hence um, the death cult that I say is associated with the mythology and the various religions that have come out of the archetype. I also believe that there is this connection between the modern concepts of so-called Atlantean wisdom, mystery schools, uh, and the emergence of the use of rhetoric, the concept of rhetoric, in place of truth as a driving force between much of our legal systems and concepts of justice, and how it sits today. And so, in the same way that I think a good understanding of where Saturn worship um, influenced right up today a connection to the modern banking system, which is the most important driving force in our socio-economic political world, in my opinion, more so than anything military, because if you can't pay for it, but if you control the means of payment, you control worlds and so on like that. Um, I also think that there's a role being played in the long-held traditions of rhetoric, which are associated back to the Atlantean or ancient Egyptian connections with Atlantis. And as Manly P. Hall said, the concept of serpent worship, is one of the oldest of the mystery religions that you can get, along with fire and fertility worship, and so on. But serpent worship may actually be even older, and it is serpent worship that and its connections to Atlantis and so on, that brings us very much into connection with this idea of the art of rhetoric. And, I link this back into where we find the character of the serpent turning up in the Garden of Eden, convincing the character Eve to go against the commandment of God, or the creator God at that time. So the so this idea that snake worship is very much a part of the Saturn death cult in its own right, that I talk about, and has basically, you can find it in today's um, secret societies like Skull and Bones, with its 322 reference to the Book of Genesis and so on like that. These societies actually call themselves rhetoric societies, and they teach rhetoric. And rhetoric is simply the art of convincing somebody of an argument, not through truth or facts, but through the idea of a clever, persuasive, argument on your part. And so serpent worship becomes the basis by which the much of the ancient religions decided they could go towards the idea of godlike status, the human being godlike status, without going through a god, if you know what I mean, that mankind could achieve his own immortality, as such, through literally arguing the case that one doesn't need God, that mankind is perfectly capable of being able to achieve this on their own, uh, without having to follow the strictures of the creator God archetype. And this really just boils down to mankind becoming his own God, or I should say their own God, in this day and age, that humankind is moving towards the concept of becoming its own God, its own immortal existence, separate of a creator God. And this links back into Genesis chapter 3, verse 22. This is a seminal element in that kind of thinking that says the creator God is not necessarily the means by which to ascend to godlike status on a par with God.
Mm. Isn't that what essentially the transhumanists are trying to achieve?
I believe so. I believe that not only are they trying to achieve a form of immortality, but they're trying to patent what becomes immortal as separate from, in the esoteric terms, that which has not been created by humankind is naturally associated to having been created by a creator God. This is if you reject the evolutionary sort of concept of science and so on like that. If you take the esoteric occult traditions, this idea of a creator God, or a driving force at the beginning that is behind the creation of all material reality and all, basically the universe, essentially designates by default ownership of that creation by that God. And so therefore the plan is to literally create a parallel form of creation that is not God created, but human created, including a form of human life and immortality, that in the modern age they are considering it to be something they can achieve through technology. In the Middle Ages, it was the alchemist traditions of attempting to find, the idea, the elixir of life, the what do you call it, fountain of youth, all this kind of idea and so on. And much of the occult world, with its initiations, its 7 initiations, and its mystery schools, is geared to that idea of finding a way to immortality that is separate from the creation per se, that is attributed to a creator God archetype. And that's the battle that they have. That's the war in the esoteric world that is fought between humans of that thinking and that kind of Gnosticism, I'll let that slip as to where I'm going with this idea, that kind of Gnosticism as opposed to the worship of a creator God, which itself has been corrupted and such. But this is the complementary type of thinking that many people who come out of what I call the second death cult way of thinking, which is the recognition of a creator God, but their creator God is this capricious, I can destroy my creation at any time, so create much favor with me, and maybe I won't destroy you when I destroy everybody else. And maybe I'll let you rule as my as my heir. These kinds of ideas have been corrupted from the original creator God, what I call silver priest period of time, which was just simply a God of justice that gave you weights and measures and legal means by which to live a just life and be and live a just life in terms of towards other people. That's been corrupted into this elite idea of we're the guys in charge. We decide what the rules are, what the laws are, and as a result, that makes us a god. It comes back to the sin of Eve, that people think she lost innocence along with the Adam character out of the Bible by eating of the fruit. What she was really claiming, which is an act of rhetoric on the part of the serpent that approached her, the shining one, as Michael Heiser translates that word Nachash from the Hebrew, a shining one, an illumined one, who has approached Eve and used rhetoric to say, don't believe it. Don't believe you'll die. In fact, you'll just become like a god who will be able to decide what's right and wrong in your own right. And hence we come to the idea that godhood or god status is really the idea that you can decide what is right and what is wrong within your reality, within the reality that you inhabit. And that's what defines a god, that ability to decide what's right and wrong, which you cannot do unless you are yourself. You can't hold that authority over anything that you have not created for yourself and own by right of creation. So that's the sort of long-winded argument behind the emergence of illumined mystery schools, serpent worship, and its connection to the transhumanist idea. The transhumanist idea is quite simply if we can make human beings in our own image and such, then they become our patent products that we can own. And if there is a creator God of any kind, they have no legal claim to what we create and such. So yeah, this is where AI, this is where artificial intelligence, where transhumanism is heading in the modern age.
Mhm. I looked up because you just talked about it, the Nachash.
Hmm.
I looked up the etymology of that word, and it
Hmm.
says, and this is the most basic meaning,
Hmm.
yeah, because there it also is translated as serpent and various other things, but the most basic meaning is to view attentively, to learn by attentive observation.
Mm.
So that is the root of the word
Yeah.
nakash. So
Mm.
meaning there is something to learn and
Yeah.
to observe.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's essentially what an illumined one is
yeah.
in the occult traditions. It is somebody who's taken the time to do all the initiations and learning, of the occult, of religions, of that sort of thing, and to become a learned and attentive person to what can be learned. The sum of all knowledge is the ultimate goal of many esoteric theosophists, people who are involved in the occult at this level.
Do you think that I mean, we have snake entities all over the world in
Mm.
every religion,
Yeah.
be it Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, be it, in Egypt with the Wadjet.
Yeah.
Um, There's not one place that is untouched by it.
Yeah.
Would you say it all goes back to one root?
Well, yeah, I mean, the mythology of it is very much based in going back to, my concepts I discussed in Saturn Death Cult, this idea that planetary catastrophes involving the planet Saturn, involving the planets Venus and Mars, very much affected, visually what people experienced during various epochs, Golden Age, so a transition from a violent transition from a purple dawn into a golden age, into a doomsday that led into a silver age of man and bronze, and now the iron age of mankind, humankind that we exist in today, according to these traditions. There is the battle that goes on between Kronos or Saturn and a thing called the Chaos Monster. I am actually I believe that the Mesoamerican mythologies and even the Chinese mythologies are much more on the money in that they meld the serpent very much in with the concept of the creator god being the planet Saturn, and what happened when effectively a brown dwarf fissioned into a bright light in our skies, became our first sun, exposed the what is called the let there light be light moment. In Western traditions, we tend to separate a battle between the god Saturn and the chaos monster that becomes the dragon, the serpent, the Ouroboros, that the snake that eats its own tail, which is really the beginnings of what would become the rings of Saturn in terms of the actual cosmology explanation, which is that when Saturn fissioned after coming into contact with the sun's electrical field, and I put this at around about 12,000 years ago, when it did so, and fissioned and became a bright light in the sky, it expelled a lot of materials from its core, including a giant piece of its core that would ultimately become the planet Venus. And that expulsion of all that material created a dark, swirling mass that surrounded the face of the sun, Saturn, and so on. And it seemed like it would engulf the face of the sun. So this battle with the chaos monster, which we find in Christian traditions, modern Christian traditions, the fight with the great devil, the great dragon, the serpent, and so on. This is where you get the origins in terms of Saturn cosmology of the snake option, the snake idea. Eventually, Saturn kills the snake god and replaces it with the rings, which bounds Saturn in the heavens and becomes the first means by which humans can tell time, just the way the sun's light reflects on those rings as the earth rotates, creates a metronomic time, hence chronos, chronometer, and so on like that, associated with the god Saturn. But yes, this original battle with the chaos god that is said to have been thrown down to earth, thrown, down to the heavens, from the heavens and so on, defeated, is very much a part of, the serpent worship idea. But with it comes the idea that the serpent brought with it wisdoms from the abode of the gods, brought it down to earth. And this is reflected in the Genesis account, where the snake is cursed, you will slither in the dust. You will never rise above the dust. In other words, the serpent becomes inextricably linked, because mankind is made from the dust. The serpent and its techniques, its ideas, becomes inextricably linked with humanity, not with the creator God. And even the messianic prophecy of the Bible talks about a serpent, bruising the heel of the Messiah, but the heel crushing the serpent's head, and so on. And then all through the Bible, with Moses and his, Moses was most definitely linked into aspects of the snake cult, or the ancient Egypt had there. You'll find a lot of references with Moses involving snakes through the book of Exodus and so on, in his story and such. But this connection, where the serpent becomes inextricably linked with the wisdom of what we have down here, ultimately uh, becomes the occult symbol of the snake climbing the pole, twirling around the pole. And at the top of the pole is the star, like we have a star on the top of a Christmas tree. All right. And the snake eventually bites the star, and that's total illumination. And the snake is representative of the human being undergoing its 7 initiations, how many curls it goes, times it curls round the pole until it reaches that level where it becomes a god in its own right, or the human that does that in accordance with the idea of the snake climbing the pole, which is really just a reference to the pillar, that rose up to heaven, the Jacob's stairway to heaven. Even Australian Aboriginals talk about a series of spears that reached into heaven that one could climb. All of these ideas go back to that connection between Saturn and Earth in ancient times, or the Golden Age period, where people felt there was the ability to climb to the abode of the gods. Well, the snake occult idea is mankind being able to do that on his own strength, as I sort of articulated before. And even Jacob's ladder is very much a vision of the descendants of Jacob being able to go to the abode of the gods and return to earth at will, up and down this ladder. And the difference of the occult is that, of course, it is human beings on their own achieving that through 7 rites of initiation to illumined full knowledge, the sum of all knowledge that a human being could have. And this is a challenge to the Creator God uh, um, monopoly on deciding who gets to go to heavens, for want of a better term. That we find that the snake religions have effectively tried to to challenge the creator God concept on that level of human aspiration.
Hmm. Yeah, that Moses was somebody who was initiated into esoteric belief systems of ancient Egypt. I'm pretty sure about that because he was raised at the royal court.
Yeah.
He was educated at Heliopolis.
Hmm.
Of course, he had that knowledge.
Yes, and one has to remember as well that his that Joseph, one of the 12 patriarchs of the 12 tribes that ended up in because of famine, ended up in Egypt and ultimately were enslaved by the Egyptians. But Joseph rose to a position second to Pharaoh, according to the Bible. A lot of people overlook the fact that at the time he married the high priest of Egypt's daughter. And so the leading tribes of Israel, Ephraim and Manasseh, that come from Joseph, because Joseph was always designated to be the birthright holder of Israel, which is more important than the scepter holder, which was Judah. And he was always designated to be so because Jacob's firstborn, Reuben, had raped his father's wife and so on. So he was disgraced. He lost it. Judah, the next born, was given the scepter, achieved the scepter, but he couldn't have the birthright. The birthright then went to the firstborn by Jacob's favorite wife, I think was Rachel. All right, and the and so that blessing um, gave a status to those tribes, the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, uh, and they are born of a woman who was an Egyptian priestess and the daughter of the high priest. So the connection there between ancient Israel and these tribes and the Egyptian side things is so profound that in fact, not only are we told that the Egyptian was there in the days of Eden, it was a tree in the time of Eden which predates the birth of Seth and Cain and Abel and so on like that, along with the Assyrian and these other people. But we're told that the Egyptians considered a brother to the Israelite tribes in terms of their status. Ultimately, Egypt becomes a symbol of secularism as opposed to Israel's priestly calling to be a kingdom of priests. And But Moses, uh, having been brought up, as you said, within the Egyptian royal household and so on, was most definitely, like all Israelites, exposed to the teachings, the wisdoms of the ancient schools of Egypt. Now, what makes this interesting, of course, is that the ancient schools, priestly schools of Egypt, which are very much linked into what I call the Silver Age of priesthoods, the start out of there and the link to Atlantis, is that while serpent worship is there, and serpent worship has that idea of shedding one's skin to become new, which is a regenerative idea, instead of following the more Greek ideals later on and certain Eastern ideals of reincarnation, the Egyptians were firm resurrectionists. That's why they buried their kings and with all their wealth and all what they could and mummified them, because they wanted to be in the best fettle, when they were resurrected at a later age. And so that strain of resurrection thinking, which is very Melchizedekian, which is a priesthood that comes out of the Shemitic lineages and such, that's the fundamental force behind what would have been the Egyptian mystery schools. And the snake, in terms of that, is at the very low rung of the form of thinking, in the sense that one has to regenerate one's mind in order to start the process of coming into agreement with God. This is the thing. They weren't seeking to replace God. The object of the Pharaoh was always to become one with God. And this is the fundamental difference between that strain of religion and what would become the Hellenistic strains of religion, which is reincarnation, but also this idea that creation itself is actually evil. The material world is evil, and we need to get away from it, and that God is actually a form of impediment to that. And they follow that line. They ultimately, yes, it was a good thing that Kronos or Saturn was murdered and changed, and we went through the process of getting rid of um, the influence there of Saturn down through Zeus and then the various other gods, and this is why they followed very much their ideas of challenging the gods. You get stories of the Titans and the war, the wars in heaven and the labors of Hercules, all this kind of stuff that comes out of the Hellenistic realm, which has much more influence on our Western philosophical and religious thinking than the Egyptian realm. But by the time of King David in the biblical narrative, it was the Egyptian influence that was far more profound in terms of the biblical Israelites and such. And of course, we need to also later on take into account the effect of the Babylonian thing. But for me, the Babylonian influence is inextricably linked into the development of interest banking or debt-based slavery as its real expression in the world, particularly in the world today. The snake type religions, whether from Atlantis or the distorted versions that the Greeks applied to it, with how the snakes became symbolic of the health industry. With the snake wrapped around a pole, the twin snakes wrapped around the pole. It's all, you see that in the chemical industries and the pharmaceutical industries and so on. This is very much the Greek approach, which again comes back to Hermes, this message of you can do it on your own. You don't need God. You can do it apart from God if you have the right mindset and apply yourself in a certain way, and you can climb that pole to Godhead.
But we also see that symbol in the Sumerian artifacts.
Most definitely.
Yeah, the double snake, the tree.
It's where the Greeks get it from, ultimately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
So, and while we are talking about the Sumerians,
Mhm.
there is a line of thought that this Nakash was actually Ea,
Mm.
and Ea
Yeah,
could
I've heard that.
not, what?
You have to remind me what Ea means again.
Ea Enki,
Oh,
basically.
Enki, Anunnaki type of connection. Yes,
Yeah,
gotcha. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah. That Ea could not get it done what he tried to do with
Hmm.
the the knowledge of good and evil, that his attempt was usurped by other forces, and that therefore he failed. And after he failed, then um, Ea was called no longer Prince of Earth,
Hmm.
E-R,
Hmm. Yeah. Earth.
E-R-R-T-H,
Yeah.
Earth, yeah.
Earth.
But he was then called Prince of Darkness,
Mm.
Devil, Satan, and what have you.
Yeah. Which
So,
harkens back to that idea of the serpent crawling around in the dust
yeah.
and never amounting to anything other than that. The words. And I've got to say it, essentially the rhetoric of the Shining One that approached Eve,
Mhm.
that's reflected in the sort of concept, this idea that it is a failed approach to God's status, is something to be. It actually in those religions and in the biblical religion, it is there to serve as a warning, not as a means by which to gain enlightenment. In other words, the knowledge of good and evil is not what brought about the fall of the biblical characters, or the destruction of Ea and so on like that. Okay, the loss of innocence, as many Christians like to term it. Adam and Eve lost her innocence the minute she was told she couldn't eat of that tree. All right, what lost? What is associated with the fall? What is associated with evil in that sense is the idea again of I can be like a god, knowing for myself, deciding what is right and wrong in this world, not taking my clue from the entity that created it, but deciding myself what is right and wrong. And this is essentially the warning that comes with the element of snake worship and so on. Humans that start to rely far too much on their own perceived knowledge, on their own. They start to believe themselves, to put it bluntly, more clever, more spiritually, more academically, more realistically clever than they really are. And this is the great warning of what is go again. Judith, it goes back to that idea of the initial conflict between the chaos monster, the serpent, the great dragon, that gets thrown down to earth in the Saturn myths, in the Mesoamerican myths, all the sort of even right down to Christian myths. It gets back to the idea of these um, this entity, this concept, this idea being thrown down to the earth. It doesn't have a place in the heavens. You know what I mean? But it's always going to battle to get there and even replace the city of the gods with its own sort of
Mm.
concepts.
Um, you said that the ancient Egyptians were more or less um, resurrectionists.
Mhm.
What deity of theirs would have been in charge of that?
Um, it's not really a deity. So Ra, um, and well, Horus is the great example of, having gone down to Hades, rescued, put back together again, which, parallels a lot of the debates you had with the Sadducees and Pharisees. What if my body gets eaten by a fish and the fish gets eaten by another fish? How does God resurrect my body? This was a debate that was going on in the time of Christ, amongst resurrectionists and so on. And the Egyptians had that sort of myth of the resurrection, Horus being brought back from the dead, so to speak, reconstituted, Ra being a part of that. But it's not so much that there is a deity that is sitting there, that is, got a production line of fixing people and resurrecting them in the future. It's about achieving a life where you are judged worthy of resurrection into a perfected immortal being. Now, the entity most associated in Egyptian thinking with that is Anubis, the what has become like the hellhound and so on, where the Egyptian was on their death would be forced into a journey where they would have to present their soul on a scale where on the other side of the scale was a feather, and their soul was represented by the human heart, was put on the other side. And if there was an imbalance, or if one was heavier than the other, decided your fate. Did Anubis eat you up and destroy you, or did you carry on to their concept of a future paradise or a new paradise? In other words, were you made worthy of resurrection into a perfected state at a future time? All right. And this was how the Egyptian religion sort of worked. And you can see the parallels with that would become Christianity, the resurrection of Christ, the resurrection promised to many Christians. This idea that Job talking about, though my body consumed by worms, I will see my God with mine own eyes, and so on. This idea of physical constitution, reconstitution into a real world, but in a perfected state. And Anubis was the one that was involved in that. The key aspect of this is that what we're talking about is being resurrectionists essentially makes you a religion of judgment. Okay. Whereas reincarnation becomes a religion of what I argue is influence. Your life is spent influencing your next incarnation and so on. All right. And to do that, you've got to get on side with the gods through sacrifices, through various aspects. You've got to learn what to do, and you progress up a cycle of incarnations until you achieve, again, harkening back to the occult idea of the snake finally reaching the star, becoming immortal. That is the final journey of the reincarnationist idea of what happens to humans. But the resurrectionist idea is you live this life, and then you're judged according to that life as to whether you are resurrected to perfection
Mm.
at a later time. And so that's what differentiates in terms of the creator God archetype that's entirely responsible for everything. In one side, it is a just God who decides whether you have made it or not. And how can I put this in the more benign versions of that? He corrects you until you become worthy of resurrection. All right. Or in the more militant, extreme version of it, he just simply gets rid of you into a place called hell. So that's the God of judgment, and that's why you get Judgment Day. But the idea of the reincarnationists and their concept of a creator force, or God that defines how reality and the spiritual worlds work, is that you have to spend your time influencing, and each life you learn more about how to influence that God. And hopefully you're born into a better situation to influence the God. But what happens, and this is why I talk about why my next project is the snake gods of Atlantis, is that influencing is governed not by truth, because that's what governs justice. To influence, you just simply got to persuade. You've got to sound good. You've got to give an argument that somebody will go with, irrespective of the truth, and so on, which is very much how our legal systems, particularly in the United States. Have you ever seen those awful American legal things where they argue and they come up with clever ideas why somebody didn't do the crime and so on, because the argument sounds good. They're guilty, but the
Mm.
argument, and this is what prosecutors in America, they could find out that the person they're prosecuting, all right, is completely innocent, but then suddenly their career is on the line, so they delve into the art of rhetoric to come up with arguments why this person is guilty, even though they know they're innocent. And this is what is the fundamental corrupting factor in what I call the Saturn death cult, but also where the snake gods of Atlantis provide the thinking and the religious, or just simply the wisdom aspect of it, is that it's not about the facts that you present to a capricious creator God who can wipe out humanity and creation in a second or whatever. It's whether you can persuade that God to give you a better deal than the guy next to you. This is the fundamental difference between the two strains. And it boils down to that's why they have a doomsday, and the Egyptian religions down through Melchizedek into some of the Judeo concepts. I hesitate to say mainstream Christianity because they're all about the idea of a vindictive God and hell and all that sort of stuff. But there is this underlying idea beyond all that of a God of justice who is seeking to correct one up to a point where, to put it, the only way to put it is that you ultimately see creation with the eyes of God rather than with your own eyes. And that's your way to becoming God-like. You have the same thought patterns as a God. You're in the image of God in that sense. But the capricious Saturn death cult type God that I've written about is all about just, trying to convince them not to kill you, but to kill the other guy. That I'm better than they are, and these are my arguments why. Nothing about truth, nothing whatever. It really boils down to you shouldn't kill me because I'm at the top of the food chain in terms of the socioeconomic order. I'm better than they are. If I'm better than them, it's better that I hang around rather than that lot. In fact, why don't I help you kill them all? And then we can be done with this argument, and we will be the new gods, the new Saturn type gods. We will become your inheritors, where we can decide what's right and wrong according to our own concepts of right and wrong. And by the way, here's our creation. This is what we were talking about before. Here's our creation that we've made. You have no claim on it, and thank you. We'll make the world in that image now, and we will take your creation completely and utterly reconstitute it, modify it until it becomes our creation. Thanks, Saturn, but no thanks. We're taking over.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, I know a lot of people that do believe in reincarnation. They don't do any rituals at all. If anything, most of them, uh, they want to get out of this because it's an enslavement tool. You
Mm,
come in here, your
mhm.
memory has been wiped.
Yeah,
In other words, you have no clue what you are supposed to learn
yeah.
this time around.
Mhm.
And it's like sending your child to school, and every evening it forgets everything
Yes.
that it has learned during the day. It makes no sense.
Yeah, I've had this debate that at least with the maligned concept of original sin, which is very badly misunderstood by the churches, but at least with that, you have an explanation for why humanity is in the situation that it's in, one way or the other, depending whether you class humanity as your immediate family, nation, tribe, clan, whatever it is. Even racial group or something, you have an idea that you're building back up from a previous paradisiacal sort of existence, um, um, uh, where things were perfect, but then it was lost. The means by which it was lost, and so on, is again the source of so much bad theology in Christianity. But in reincarnation, there is no how. What I'm saying is that um, if you get the absurd idea that a woman raped is paying for something done in a previous life.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is a
Okay.
perversion of reincarnation.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is, and all these things around this, yeah, because it will keep you docile.
Yeah.
It makes you docile because you start believing this is happening to me because I was bad in
Yes.
another life
Yeah.
that I have no recollection of.
And
And that, of course, is nonsense.
and one of the things that when I did my article on Atlantis and secret societies and the theft of of the divine sovereignty. One of the things that comes out about the reincarnations, particularly the Western Hellenistic based, not necessarily the Hindu Buddhist, but the Hellenistic concepts of reincarnation and so on, other than the idea that they consider the material world to be fundamentally evil and so on,
Mm,
but ultimately they have to postulate the idea of millions and billions of years of existence, all right, going back in time so far back that nobody can really, it's a chicken and egg thing. So what kicked off this problem of having to deal with what we did in previous lives, having to rise above that or whatever over a period of time? That's a hallmark of this kind of occult thinking, is that they appeal everything then becomes to be honest, like evolution. You've got to think in terms of billions of years of existence so far back in time that you don't have a definitive point, all right, for that. Uh, in the resurrectionist idea, which is based on the creator God archetype, the point of beginning is not necessarily the fall of humankind as given in the Bible or various versions of that in other mythologies. It's what I call the let there be light moment, because that is the moment that human beings begin to be able to tell time, calculate the passage of time. That very thing that if you're being reincarnated before the passage of time, how can you even conceive of billions of years? You don't know what a year is or anything. So the starting point for the resurrectionist concept, the archetypal creator God of judgment idea, is that it introduces the concept of time, which is the beginning of weights and measures, which is the beginning of law, which is ultimately the beginning of whether you've done something bad or haven't done something bad. Do you see where I'm going with this?
mhm,
You've got to have that initial idea that time, the ability to calculate time, is the beginning of civilization. Prior to that, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, human beings existed on the planet, but they had no concept of time. They weren't able to say a year has passed. Family groups had to exist, and the Mesoamerican mythologies talk about this time and such, but they had to exist in a state where you had to be within calling distance. All right. And if you went to sleep, you had no idea whether you slept an hour or 10 minutes or 5 days or something like that. Okay. And so unless you were in physical contact, and that's why everything was based around families, clans, and tribes, and so on, unless you were in physical contact, you could so easily become disoriented and separated from your support group, from your survival group at that time. The let there be light moment in all the mythologies, and they all have this moment, the bursting forth the Mesoamerican mythologies talk about Raven being docile and sleeping, and suddenly, boom, Raven being the primordial Saturn archetype that bursts into life. It's that idea of being able to create weights and measures that is started by being able to calculate time that is the starting point we all need to understand where we are today and where we might be going, because
mm,
it comes back to weights and measures.
mm. Okay. So, and we will go deeper into the subject on the other side. Our first hour is gone, and we will see the patrons in a little bit.